Good afternoon. I have three panelists that I want to introduce to you today as a part of this session here. And to give you a little bit of a backdrop, these individuals have gone through, they received grants on last year and have worked over the last 9 months or so on their particular programs and are here to give us an update as to what their findings are and conclusions thus far. We're limited on time, so they don't get an opportunity to go into great detail, but I will offer to you that they will be around for the majority of today and then in some cases in the morning as well. So take advantage of an opportunity to ask questions if we don't have a chance to do that today. The first person that I'll introduce you to is Dr. Martin Bud Fennema with Florida State University. And just to give you an idea of their research topic, the topic is Are Accountants Made or Born? An analysis of self-selection into and success in the accounting profession. This is a very important question because we know that individuals self-select into the accounting profession or into the accounting major, and there's not a real good understanding as to whether or not they are accurately assessing their abilities. So this work looks into that initially. But then secondly, as we know, it's important to know whether academic training is able to create successful accountants or whether success is more closely based on intrinsic abilities. And so their work looks into some of that as well. Our second presenter will be Joseph Ugrin. And Joseph is with Kansas State University, and their research topic was state policies and attitudes toward acceptance of advanced placement courses and the comparison of success on the CPA exam between students that enter college with advanced placement credit and those that do not. And it's a two-part study as well. In their project, the two phases simply are, phase one, the project they're proposing and working on is to examine the current policies and attitudes toward that executive directors and boards of accountancy have as it relates to AP courses. And in addition, they'll examine the attitude toward the creation of an accounting AP course. And then in phase two of the project, they compare the success on the CPA exam for individuals that have taken AP courses versus those that have not. So again, some very interesting work there. And then our third presenter is Dr. Martin Coe, and he is with Western Illinois University. And in their work, what they're looking at is the intention to sit for the CPA examination. And they're looking at it in terms of factors related to cost, the exam itself, support, and other career factors. And as we know, the demand is high right now, particularly with the changing demographics of the CPAs and baby boomers beginning to retire. And this work is also highlighting the fact that the current accounting literature lacks contributions related to students' intention to sit for the CPA exam. And so accordingly, in their study, they look to fill the void in the accounting literature related to the CPA credential. In the study, the participants came from schools that had both 120 hours to sit as well as 150 hours to sit, and any number in between that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bud Fennema, and he'll share information with you from his work.
Thank you, Alfonzo and Ed. I get called a lot of things, but esteemed isn't one of them. So that's unusual for me. I first want to take just a moment to thank NASBA for funding this. We as academics have to pay doctoral students to do things, and even though these might not seem like a lot of money and a lot of effort to collect this data, it really is. And this kind of grant really takes care of things, and I appreciate it greatly. So this study came from this question. Almost 30 years ago as a doctoral student, I was taking a psychology class, and this is called the Meyer horse trading problem. It's from the 50s, and it says a man buys a horse for $60, he sells the horse for $70, he buys it back for $80, and he sells it for $90. How much did he make or lose in the horse trading business? And I looked at this and I thought, who could ever miss this? You know, this is insane. This is so simple. I mean, an accountant, I see this as financial accounting. He buys it for $60, sells it for $70, he makes $10. He buys it for $80, he sells it for $90, he makes another $10, he makes $20. Or he spent $60 and $80, $140, And he got back 70 and 90, 160. Well, believe it or not, over 50% of the people who get asked this question miss it. And I thought, why? How? It's so simple. But then I started thinking, the title of this paper could be, How Did I Get This Way? How did I become a numbers person? But then I started thinking about it. Well, I have a start in a Ph.D., I have a master's, I'm a CPA. Maybe it was all that training. At 17, could I have solved this? And of course, I couldn't answer that question because I couldn't go back to being 17 before I took my accounting training. And so what we did is we went to a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds. We got 1,400 Accounting 101 students, make sure they hadn't taken it before, which was 20% of them we had to eliminate, unfortunately. Make sure they hadn't taken a high school accounting class. We wanted accounting virgins. And we asked them these questions, and we followed them for the next 2 years. And out of that 1,400, there were 189, that became accounting majors out of that 1,400, and 89 who graduated. And we ask them this question, we ask them a question with sunk costs in it, we ask them a question with opportunity costs, things that think like an accountant. Why do I think like an accountant? Why was accounting maybe not easy for me in college, but it was doable. And I knew people who were way smarter than me SAT-wise who couldn't figure this out to save their souls. How many of you have ever thought about this? Why am I good at this? And that's where we were after. So we ask a variety of questions. Can I go away from the conclusions? Mm-hmm. Sure. He's going to let me. So our first question is, do we self-select? Did I go into accounting because I was a numbers person? And, again, I can't really answer that. There's hardly a more important decision that we make in our lives than picking an accounting major. How do we do it? And so we asked these questions of these accounting virgins and then asked them what major they were going to be. And we said, well, are the people who are good at this stuff are they the folks that go into accounting? And the answer, unfortunately, I think, is no. The people who were good at this were no more likely to pick accounting than any other major. Even though 38% of them said, we asked them, why are they picking this major? For money, my dad does accounting, whatever it is. 38% said they selected it because they're good at it. Well, that just wasn't so. They weren't good at the horse trader problem or the other things we gave them. So they don't self-select. And this is somewhat of a problem because if people are going to choose a major that they can't finish, as I said, 189 of them became accounting majors, only 89 graduated. And that's pretty typical. It probably happened at your school. So then another question is, well, these little accounting things, that we ask them, are they related to their success in their accounting major? And we followed them for 2 years and looked at their accounting grades. And the answer was absolutely yes. They did better in Accounting 101 if they did well on our horse trading problem, and they did better in all their accounting classes in the horse trader problem. We also got some data from NASBA on CPA exam. And for 3 of the 4 parts, the answer was, again, a resounding yes. If they were able to do our little horse trading problem and the other things, then they were better able to pass the CPA exam, except for FAR. So we're not worried, we're trying to figure out why that might be. Okay, so the third question, we said, well, okay, some people don't start out really well in accounting. Can they get better? We as accounting professors, we give them 8 accounting classes. Do they get better over time at our horse trading problem at the others? We asked them all those questions when they were ready to graduate again. And the answer is some do. And this is a little complicated, but if they were in the top half in the beginning, when they were freshmen, or sophomores more likely, if they were in the top half of the performers, they got even better by the time they finished an accounting degree, our 8 courses. If they were in the bottom half, they didn't. And this supports what we anecdotally have always said around the coffee table, is that, the rocks don't learn. They can stumble by, but they don't get it. And the good students get better and better, and that's what this really supports. So just to tie this all up, and I messed with Alfonso's slides here, do we have natural ability? Do we come into this world as accountants, or do we become accountants? And if our one study is to say anything, is, yeah, we kind of come in with with natural ability. We are numbers people, and we can get better through college, but that ability helps us in the courses, helps us on the CPA exam. And whether it can be taught or not is still obviously an open question, but at least for the rocks, for the bottom half, the answer is probably not. We're not really helping them. And so, you know, we can train them, make them better, but you know, how far we can take them is an open question. So, am I within my time?
You are, bud. Thank
Great.
you so much.
Thank you very much.
Joe, I'll advance the slides to get you set. And again, to remind you, Joe Ugrin is from Kansas State University, and they are looking at your attitudes toward advanced placement and as well as advanced placement performance as it relates to the CPA exam. Joe?
I too would like to thank Alfonzo and NASBA for funding our project. In the accounting profession, one thing that we often or we don't see is academics and practitioners sitting together at the table and in conferences together. And if you went out in some of the other disciplines, if you went to a medical conference, there's a good chance that you would see academics and practitioners working on the same problems. And one thing that we started at Kansas State is a Center for Collaborative and Applied Accounting Research, and try to find situations where we can work together with practitioners to solve real problems, and try to hopefully publish those in places that academics find valuable and practitioners find valuable too. So this helped fund an initial project in that center, and it's been important for us, and I think the results and the questions will be important for the accounting community. So we had two principal questions that we wanted to ask, and that is there any support for advanced placement accounting, an advanced placement accounting course amongst the state boards? If you don't know, if you have not already participated with this already, there is a big push to develop an advanced placement accounting course. And some of the arguments for that are that we will attract a different group of students that maybe we haven't had a chance to attract in the past. So if you're familiar with things like STEM, is anybody familiar with STEM? Science, technology, engineering, and math. My wife's a educator at the lower level, and in her schools, that's where they push the smart kids into STEM courses. And those typically don't gear kids at the high school level towards majoring in accounting in the future. It's to try to generate students that will ultimately major in engineering and in fields like that. So there's been a push to develop this accounting AP class. Now, that's actually getting relatively far along. But one question that nobody's asked is there even support for that amongst the state boards? And then, are AP students actually the best and brightest? Nobody really knows that. Do they perform better in college? Do they perform better in their professions, on their professional exams, and so forth? The organization that runs AP typically looks at the next college course. So if you take an AP class, you get credit for a college course, typically, if a college accepts the credit. And they look to see if students do well in the subsequent course. And actually mixed results. In a lot of cases, students don't do very well when after they've taken AP. And so that led us to these questions. And I'll just give you briefly some of the results. And we have just a mountain of data. We have over 1,000 individuals with data about their high school performance, their AP performance, the classes they've taken, their college performance, and ultimately how they did on the professional exam. So the first thing that we asked is their support. And some of you may have responded to just a general survey, and there was a resounding yes, there was lots of support. So if you responded to the survey, a good chance you probably said yes. So on a 1 to 5 scale, on a series of questions, every question came above a 3.5, with 5 being very supportive. So that was sort of the easy part of the study, and probably the most interesting part is how do students do. So one one question that we looked at was AP engagement. So did students take AP classes? If a student was an AP sort of student and had taken at least one AP class, they ultimately did better on the exam by a little over about 2.5 points. We followed that up by looking at if they'd actually passed. So in other literature, we find that students don't perform well in college, even if they've taken AP classes, because in a lot of cases they take AP classes under the expectation that that's going to help them get into college, get placed better, and so forth, but often they get into a class that might be above their head, and then they don't learn anything, and they get to college and they actually do worse. And so the success measure often is whether or not they actually passed. And AP scores their AP exam as a 1 through 5. And typically passing is having a score of what they give a 3. And we found an even bigger increase in students that had scored 3 or above. And so, yes, these students that are AP students ultimately perform better on the CPA exam. If they've passed an AP test, they ultimately do better on the exam too. And actually, they do better in college. Their GPAs are better. And so the one thing that's probably important in relation to AP is that these are top students, and that ultimately does translate into college and ultimately translates to the professional exam, and that's a good thing, and probably is enough to, I would say, support AP. What we found as we dug down on the information is that what AP classes translate. What are the things that they teach in those AP classes, or what are the skills that those students develop that ultimately translates into better performance in college and on the professional exam? And as we drilled down on the classes, there's over 40 AP classes, or right about 40 AP classes. Most of them are geared towards science, technology, engineering, and math, but there's some in the arts and different social sciences, and even into things like graphic design and that sort of stuff. There's nothing in business fields. When we drilled down on the classes, we found really one class that has a very strong relationship to performance in college and performance on the professional exam, and that is AP English and Composition. And then there's 2 other classes that had some significance too, and one was calculus, and the other one was U.S. government. And the others really didn't have any explanatory power. And so as we looked at what these courses aimed to achieve and the objectives of those courses, they had a lot of similarities. And let me just read some of on the left-hand side of this graphic is some of the things that are in the objectives of those courses. They aim to help students learn how to develop, revise, solve problems, experiment, interpret results, support conclusions, make and assess causes and consequences. And many of those were objectives of all 3 courses. And as we looked at that, we looked at those in relation to Bloom's taxonomy, and we found that, well, those courses are really developing higher order thinking skills. And those skills tend to translate into students ultimately performing better in college classes. And what I've found particularly interesting, particularly in the last couple of months, as I've learned about developments in the CPA exam and those changes and things, I find it encouraging that the exam is going down a path of gearing more towards those higher order skills. And somebody developing the exam, as we said when we were looking at our results, must have done their homework pretty well, because our results seem to suggest the same thing, that those are the important things. And that's probably one of the most interesting takeaways is that. So their support, AP students, they do tend to be the brightest, and that translates well into college. As the development of this AP class transpires, we're hoping that they'll take into consideration that the class should probably try to enhance these sort of characteristics and higher order skills. So, thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Our third presenter is Dr. Martin Cole, and he's from Western Illinois University. And again, his research is on the intention to sit for the CPA exam, excuse me. And I'll turn it over to you, Martin.
I also would like to thank Alfonzo and thank NASBA for the support of our research. It really helps us realize the importance of research to the profession. So the research project I'm going to talk to you about here actually relates to the law of supply and demand. I guess really the underlying research question behind this related to just that. Are we going to have enough CPAs in the future? And there is quite a bit of information out there that suggests that the demand is high right now and the demand will continue to be high. Of course, you can't really totally predict the future, but there's also some information out there that suggests that we're going to have trouble meeting that demand. We're going to have trouble meeting that demand. So the question that kind of begged to be asked then is, if we're going to maybe have a problem meeting the demand for CPAs, what can we do to put more CPAs in the pipeline? And I guess that starts back in an AP class. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going to go home and talk to my local educators about AP classes. But I guess really from our vantage point in college, that starts with identifying students that would be candidates to take the CPA exam. And more specifically, what would influence that student to sit for the CPA exam. So that was what we looked at. We looked at the idea that students are going to be influenced to take the exam by certain factors. And the areas that we focused on were the exam itself, factors such as difficulty, attractiveness of taking the exam, and so forth. Support from family and friends and faculty. Career factors, the option to have a career avenue that would be attractive and so forth, and then the cost. So we kind of looked at a lot of these different factors, and it was our hope that we would be able to provide a benefit both to academics and to practice with our work here. So the most significant findings out of the research were what's up on the slide right now. Let me kind of identify one thing that we found kind of surprising. We went into this study thinking that cost would be a factor. We went into this thinking that cost would be a factor that would influence a student's intention to sit for the CPA exam. And we broke that down by both the cost to prepare for the exam and the cost to take the exam, as well as expectations of financial support from somebody. And contrary to what we believed, we actually found that cost was not a factor to a student's intention. So I guess that's good and bad, but it kind of takes that one thing out of there that's sort of easy to fix, right? We can't just throw money at the problem. We can't just have a whole lot of grants and scholarships and solve this problem. We did find, though, that there were some factors that significantly influenced a student's intention to sit for the CPA exam. And keep in mind, as Alfonzo said, we studied both 120-hour to sit jurisdictions as well as 150-hour to sit. So if you were to look at all 54 jurisdictions, there's actually more jurisdictions that allow you to take the exam with 120 hours than 150. And so that was relevant because some of our students did not know that. They did not know that they were eligible in their jurisdiction, even though the majority of jurisdictions allow you to sit for the exam in 120. They didn't know that was an option. And that becomes somewhat relevant when you start to think about the meat and potatoes of the exam, because the exam tests primarily academic information that you receive. For example, a lot of the FAR information comes from intermediate accounting. If you take the exam after 150 hours, you're just that much further away from when you had intermediate 1 and 2. So what we found was the option to sit for the exam after 120 hours did influence, it significantly influenced a student's intention to take the exam. The attractiveness of passing the exam. So this obviously includes things like being able to get a job in public practice or in private practice and so forth. So we found that was a factor. If students found the attractiveness to be there, that would influence them to take the exam. Social support. And the social support primarily is coming from family and friends here. We also had faculty in there as well, but in our research we tried to separate that support that a student would get from family and friends. For example, if you have a mom or a dad or a husband or a wife that is supporting you in taking that exam, that was significant in somebody's decision to take the exam. And then access to a role model. And this role model did not have to be a family or a friend. It just had to be access to a role model through a mentoring program or what have you. That also significantly influenced somebody's decision to take the exam, having access to a role model. And then a protean career model. So this relates to, I think it's Greek, a Greek god, a god who could change their personality or whatever they needed to do to be whatever they needed to do. In the career force, career literature, that refers to basically having a portable career, having skills and tools that allow you to move around your career. And so this kind of, unlike my dad who worked for the same company for 37 or 38 years, this relates to an individual like myself who might work for 7 or 8 companies in their career, and having skills that would allow you to be mobile. And that was found to be a significant factor in a decision to take the CPA exam. So we found that to be interesting, but believe it or not, we don't just do research for the fun of doing research. We try to do research. Well, you're shaking your head on that. We do research hopefully to benefit practice primarily because we are a professional discipline. We hope our research benefits practice, and then also in this case benefits academia. And so I think these are some of the takeaways that we have from this project that we can maybe employ to try to have more impact on helping students decide to pursue the CPA credential. One is inform students of the benefits of being a CPA. So I'm guessing most of us in this room are CPAs or understand the benefit of being a CPA, but believe it or not every student in that classroom, even if they're an accounting major, really recognizes the benefit of that. So that's something we can do then, is we can try to really show the benefit of being a CPA to our students. If you really drill down into the research, if we had 9 or 10 hours to talk about this research and really drilled into it, you would see that one of the factors that the research really talked about was helping students foster their own self-efficacy. Their belief that they can do that. And that might be obvious to somebody, that if you're confident in your ability, that you would be able to do well. But there are things we can do as educators to help students increase their self-efficacy or become aware of it. If applicable, inform students that the exam can be taken in a 120-hour-to-sit jurisdiction. So I happen to live in Illinois, which I teach at our Moline, Illinois campus on the border of Iowa and Illinois. So Iowa's a 120-hour-to-sit, Illinois is 150. So some of those students would benefit from knowing that they could take the exam in 120 hours. There are other things you have to be aware of. For example, would that disqualify your education component later on in a 150-hour-to-sit jurisdiction, which fosters more research questions. And then increase opportunities for students to interact with role models. Boy, this is something where practice can really, really help us. We've been really lucky at Western Illinois University. Our alumni are phenomenal. Our partners in the profession are phenomenal, and they're always willing to step up. And I would hope that all universities would have that opportunity. And then try to help students gain a sense of self-competency and self-worth. And then, of course, finally, try to help students see how that can help them manage their own career.
Thank you, Martin. Let's give. So we have about 3 minutes, so we have an opportunity to field a couple questions if anyone out there has them. We'd love to do that. Okay. Well, these gentlemen will be here the rest of this afternoon for the most part and will be with us tonight. If anyone has any questions or would like some additional information, feel free to reach out to them. And they've all thanked me and NASBA. I'd like to thank the NASBA board and the education committee for continuing this program. I think it's been very valuable for us each of the last 4 years. Ed?
Thanks, Alfonso. Just quick poll. How many fellow rocks do we have out here besides me? Come on, be honest, Sweeney. Okay. Leonard? Okay. All right. Well, in all seriousness, I think you'll see that you all agree that the research being done is valuable to us as state board regulators, as well as anyone else interested in the future of the profession. And gentlemen, thank you for your fine work.